Dear Prime Minister, dear previous Minister of Science and Higher Education, dear Excellencies, and dear prize winners of the Kavli prizes in astrophysics, neuroscience, and nanoscience. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege to welcome you to this year's Kavli Prize Science Forum. I am Nils Christian Stenseth, the President of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. The topic of this year's Kavli Prize Science Forum is Science and Global Health. Improving global health depends upon methodologically solid science. The Norwegian government, I know, is dedicated to contribute significantly to an improved global health, both through the application of existing scientific knowledge, as well as contributing to obtaining new scientific knowledge based upon methodologically solid science. With these introductory remarks, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome our Prime Minister, Jens Stoltenberg, to the floor. The floor is yours. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great honor for me and the Norwegian government to be here today and to cooperate with the Kavli Foundation and with the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. And it's also really a great pleasure to congratulate the winners of the Kavli Prize this year. And you are all distinguished scientists, and we really all admire what you have done to move our understanding of the world further. And I would like to underline that for Norway it is really a great honor to be able to host the Kavli Prize Week and to be here together with all of you today. Long before the Kavli Prize was founded, Fred Kavli had gained recognition for a very successful business venture. But instead of resting on his laurels, he has dedicated his energy and wealth to advancing science, to benefit humanity, to recognize outstanding achievements in astrophysics, in nanoscience and neuroscience. Kavli has said that he was fascinated by the very biggest, the very smallest, and the thing you need to understand both of them, the human brain. His focus on basic science reflects his long-term commitment and approach. Time, hard work, and persistence are essential for achieving advances in basic science. Great discoveries are dependent on researchers having the freedom, the curiosity, and the means to pursue challenges. And I used to tell the Norwegian audience every time I speak about science that actually one of the few decisions, or actually the only decision I have made regarding my own career is to not become a politician. I decided to become a scientist. So when I finished my thesis at the University of Oslo, I left politics and I started to work in the Department of Science in the Central Bureau of Statistics. I was able to stay there for 2 years. Then I was asked to become what we call State Secretary in the Ministry of Environment. And I remember I told my family and myself that I would only go into politics for 1, maximum 2 years. Now I've been there for 22 years or something like that. But I still have leave from my job in the Department of Science in the Central Bureau of Statistics. So I really admire all you who have been able to, what shall I say, fill your life with something pure, something rational, instead of me, which has devoted my life to something less rational and at least less pure than real scientific work. So I like the smell of scientific work, and and scientists, and I appreciate much to be here. The topic of today's forum is very close to my heart, and it's also very close to the importance of science, because when I started to work with health, international health, I started to work on the questions of immunization vaccines. And it is really a miracle, a scientific miracle, to see a child being immunized against, for instance, polio. 1 or 2 drops in the mouth of the child can prevent some of the most deadly diseases in the world. And to see that in practice, as I've been able to do, being Prime Minister in a government which has devoted much of our time and efforts to global health, has really been to discover the importance of medical science and the great achievements the world has made in developing medical science. And I would also like to underline for you that great discoveries are dependent on researchers having the freedom and the ability to also work on those issues which are not so obviously leading to results in the near future. Nobody commissioned the X-ray machine, which is so essential in medicine today. It was Wilhelm Röntgen's hard work and curiosity that led to the discovery in 1895. And nobody commissioned the penicillin, but it was Alexander Fleming's creativity and hard work that led to the discovery in 1928. And nobody commissioned the polio vaccine, which has virtually eradicated the disease. It was John Enders and Jonas Salk's persistence that led to the discovery in 1948 and 1952. So there can be no doubt that basic science has brought immense benefits to humanity, but we must remember that there are years of hard work behind every medical breakthrough. As I said, my government has made global health a key priority in its foreign and development policy. With limited resources and available knowledge, we can save millions of lives. Universal access to health services is a fundamental human right, but it's also smart economics. Investing in health ensures a healthier population, a more productive population, and in turn higher growth and wealth creation. Three of the UN Millennium Development Goals deal specifically with health. Norway is in the forefront of efforts to improve maternal health and reduce child mortality. The efforts of the international community are paying off. Despite population growth, the number of deaths under 5, death of children under 5, has fallen by nearly 40%, from 12 million in 1990 to 7.2 million in 2011. That is a great achievement. But still, millions of women and children die from medical conditions that could easily have been prevented and treated. For only a few cents, not even dollars, many lives could have been saved with medicines that stop dangerous bleeding and infections. This situation is simply not acceptable. Therefore, Norway welcomes UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's efforts to rectify this through his global strategy for women's and children's health. Under this strategy, I have had the honor to co-chair the UN Commission on Life-Saving Commodities together with the President of Nigeria. We will launch our report in New York on the 26th of September this year. The Commission has identified a number of essential but overlooked medicines and life-saving commodities for women and children. We will recommend 10 innovative actions to rapidly increase both access to and the use of these commodities. It is estimated that this alone will save more than 6 million lives by 2015. Let me give you just one example. Research has shown that zinc is an effective treatment for childhood diarrhea, but this is not widely known. We have estimated that over 1 million young lives can be saved by 2015 by scaling up the use in high-burden countries. Vaccination, as I mentioned, is another example of a way of improving the health of millions and one of the most cost-effective ways of fighting child mortality. Immunizing a child against the most common diseases costs only $20 or about the price of 2 McDonald's Happy Meals in Oslo. Then I have to admit that that perhaps tells you more about the price level in Oslo than about the price of vaccines and immunization. But still, it is obvious that vaccines, immunization, is the way we can achieve the biggest, the cheapest, and the most cost-effective results when it comes to improving child health. And that's the reason why Norway has invested so much, together with the Gates Foundation and other countries, in immunizing children. And when I was Prime Minister back in 2000, we launched the big initiative, the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization, Gavi. And it was launched together with the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, and Norway. And I remember I went on the podium and I announced that Norway, we were going to allocate 1 billion Norwegian kroners for this the Gavi Alliance. And then after me, Bill Gates came up and he announced that they would allocate $1 billion for the same. So Norway has supported the Gavi Foundation very much, but actually the Gates Foundation has been the leading institution in increasing the number of children who are immunized, and thereby also decreasing the number of children who are dying out of very easily preventable diseases, like, for instance, measles. Measles is really a success story. In Africa, the number of deaths from measles have been reduced by 90%, almost entirely caused by more immunization against measles. More than 300 million children in low-income countries have been vaccinated with vaccines that they previously had no access to, and millions of lives have been saved just because of the increased number of children who have been immunized. But still, more than 1.7 million children die every year from diseases that can be prevented by vaccination. So we must support the research that leads to new and better vaccines. And the main aim of the Norwegian support for Gavi, the Global Alliance for Immunization and Vaccines, is actually to do 3 things. One is to buy or to procure more vaccines. The other is to develop the infrastructure. We need the health stations, we need a cold chain to be able to get the vaccines out all around the country to the rural areas. And then, and perhaps one of the most important purposes of Gavi is to support research, because we need better vaccines and more advanced vaccines. And we have made a lot of progress when it comes to, for instance, developing new vaccines against diarrhea, which is one of the biggest and most dangerous baby killers in the world. So we have to do more, and we have to get better vaccines through investing even more in the research of more advanced vaccines into the future. Today's revolution in the life sciences provides us with enormous opportunities. It provides the basis for developing new and groundbreaking medicines, but at the same time we must ensure that this revolution does not create even greater disparities in access to health care. Because, of course, it is really a great achievement that we are able to make medical understanding, medical knowledge, medical science even more advanced. But it is a problem that only 10% of global expenditure on health research is devoted to the health problems that mainly affects the poorest 90% of the world's population. So you use 10% to address the science we need to develop the health, to improve the health of 90% of the world population. This inequalities in health may be even greater if you are not doing more to create a more just distribution of the financing of health and to the development of new medicines. Therefore, we also give priority to research that benefits all people around the globe, and Norway will continue to support such research because we think that's one of the best ways we can promote economic development and alleviate poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, today's panel is well chosen to address these topics, and I'm convinced that by the end of this afternoon, the participants of this seminar will both have gained new insights and become aware of new challenges. So I thank you once again for this opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Bob Kahn, president of the Kavli Foundation, and on behalf of Fred Kavli and our foundation, let me also welcome you to this second biennial Kavli Prize Science Forum. Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to thank you for taking the time from, I know, a very busy schedule to be with us today. Your presence and the remarks you just made really do signal the importance you place on science as a foundation for the health and well-being of modern societies and people around the globe. And I have a feeling, since we didn't share our notes, that we're going to be saying some similar things. At the first Kavli Prize Science Forum in 2010, the topic was the role of international cooperation in the advancement of science. And I think everybody was thrilled a couple of months ago. The discovery was announced of the Higgs field and the Higgs boson. And it's probably the most dramatic recent example of such cooperation in science. The discovery made page-one headlines around the world. Yet it took very large international groups working for 50 years, really, and at enormous international facilities, the Large Hadron Collider being the latest, actually, before success was achieved. And I can tell you that success was not guaranteed. But it is a great illustration of the scale of international cooperation that sometimes is required in certain fields in order to make basic scientific discoveries at the very edge of our knowledge. This year, the forum's topic, as you know, is science and global health. And the Prime Minister addressed it, but I would ask as well the question, what does basic science have to do with health around the world? I would note that it's been just a bit more than 30 years since the first case of HIV/AIDS was discovered at UCLA in 1981. And AIDS rapidly became a pandemic, and millions of people have lost their lives. Even some had gone to the hospital for an operation and became infected because the blood supply had become tainted. And I tell a personal story here. I was a lucky one. In 1982-83, I had a very serious car accident, 4 operations over 9 months, and an uncountable number of transfusions. It turned out we had no tests at the time. I did not become infected. Not all were so lucky. The U.S. Open tennis tournament is going on today in New York. It's being played at the Arthur Ashe Stadium. The great tennis player, Arthur Ashe, ironically, a UCLA graduate, is one of the more famous of the unlucky. He had heart transplant operation, the blood transfusions were tainted, and he died. Yet within 5 years of that first diagnosis, Basic medical scientists and biologists identified the HIV virus and developed tests to ensure a safe blood supply. Their work provided the underpinnings for diagnostic tests and ultimately for the drugs and treatments that today enable control of the disease. Within 15 years of the first identified case, contracting AIDS was no longer a death sentence. Basic science was crucial. Without the basic science established by virologists, cell and molecular biologists, and so many others, the drug treatments we have today would have taken much longer to develop, with even greater suffering and loss of life. Think how long it took to control polio, which the Prime Minister mentioned. So I say simply, basic science really matters, and supporting it matters even more. Let me introduce our moderator for the panel. The moderator today will be Mr. Pallab Ghosh, science correspondent for the BBC, where he's been for 23 years. He is the past president of the Association of British Science Writers and past president of the World Federation of Science Journalists, and I think we have 8 or 10 of the young science journalists here today, organized by the Norwegian Academy. It's really wonderful. So it's a pleasure to welcome Pallab Ghosh to moderate the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Prime Minister, Mr. Kavli, presidents of the Norwegian Academy and the Kavli Foundation, prize winners, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming along to this highly prestigious event. The Kavli Prize Science Forum every 2 years discusses some of the major issues in science and science policy. And today we're discussing global health, and in particular the role of science. And I too will cover some of the things that the Prime Minister said as well, because you set out quite clearly not just how important the role of science is in this area, but just how important it is to get it right. And that's what, with a distinguished panel, we're here to discuss. From the US, from Europe, and Asia, we hope to cover this ground. Now, I just want to set out a little bit of the background. Health and disease, as you've said, Bob, have no borders. We often think of chronic illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes as something that affects only industrialized nations, but increasingly, these are problems for the South. And equally, infectious diseases, HIV, AIDS, influenza, cholera, TB, are not something that we don't need to worry about anymore. Because of transportation, they can affect every one of us, so we shouldn't take our eye off the ball. The global nature of these diseases now call for global solutions. And this forum will call on some of the best experts and distinguished scientists in the world to pose radical solutions for what science can do to improve health globally, and identify some of the obstacles in the way, because although there have been remarkable success stories, are we getting it right? Are we perhaps guilty of imposing top-down measures and maybe not listening enough to how effective they are, what can be done to change the situation on the ground? We want to discuss what the most promising technologies are for prevention, treatment, and diagnosis. Is low-tech as good as high-tech? And many currently available vaccines, for instance, for example, against cervical cancer, require cold storage and multiple doses. Why are we not seeing greater demand to develop vaccines that can be transported at room temperature and only require one dose? We'll hear how environmental technologies, including satellite imaging, can be harnessed to monitor and even predict outbreaks. Other areas of science, from genetics to epidemiology, are showing new trends in chronic diseases. For some countries, these new waves of diseases could reach chronic proportions that could cause a health tsunami. So, if science can provide some of these early warning systems, are they being best used, or are institutional factors or plain old conservatism stopping them from being used? It'd be a shame if that were the case. Now, what's important, each speaker will we've got some great speakers, and I've restricted them to 7 minutes for their opening remarks. And the reason for that is that it's important that this is part of a conversation. And I do want each of you to be involved and make your points known when we get to the question sessions. But also, this is being transmitted across the web, and people who are watching this on the website can send in their questions by email through info@kavlifoundation.org or tweet with hashtag KavliSF. So, I just ask the panellists now to take their place. And Prime Minister, I know you've got to leave now, so thank you very much for your time and your insightful comments. So let me introduce each speaker who will give a brief presentation. The first speaker is Harvey Fineberg. Thanks for coming, Harvey. He's the president of the Institute of Medicine. He served as provost of Harvard University from 1997 to 2001, following 13 years as the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health. He's devoted most of his academic career to the fields of health policy, and most importantly, decision-making, where I think, however good the science, if you get the decisions wrong, then it's not going to be effective, and I think that's going to be a theme for this meeting. His past research has focused on the process of policy development and implementation, the assessment of medical technology, and the evaluation and use of vaccines and dissemination of medical innovations. Dr. Fineberg helped found and served as president of the Society for Medical Decision-Making, and also served as a consultant to the World Health Organization. At the Institute of Medicine, he has chaired and served on a number of panels with health policy issues ranging from AIDS to new medical technology. Dr. Fineberg is also the recipient of several honorary degrees. And so, Harvey, would you make your remarks?
Oh, thank you so much, Pallab. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be part of this eminent group who have an opportunity to speak with you today. And particularly, I must say to Fred Kavli, what an honor it is to be able to witness and hear the extraordinary stories and science of the Kavli Prize winners this year, and to be with all of you to talk about a subject that is so profoundly important for all of us, global health and the role of science in global health. It's very fitting that we are having this conversation in Norway, in Oslo. As you heard from the Prime Minister, Norway has been a leader in the world in its commitment to global health and a model for every nation in thinking about the relationship of its responsibility to its own people and to people everywhere. Indeed, as we think about the meaning of global health, a very good way to think about it, I believe, is to consider global health as public health with the population of the whole world as the object of your population. This has several implications. It means you think about health in terms of equity as well as achievement, because every life has merit and worth, every life, everywhere in the globe. It means that you think about global health in a way that breaks down the barrier between domestic and international, because the health concept of the health of the population for everyone includes the notion of health at home as well as health abroad. This kind of broad definition incorporates the ideas, some of which are more familiar to us when we think about global health, the problems of the tropical infectious diseases that are especially prevalent in parts of the world, the problems of the burden of disease, especially in the poorer parts of the world, that create such a tremendous challenge for health. The interests of comparative health systems, looking at the needs and achievements in one country compared to another, and thinking about global health as the roles and responsibilities of transnational cooperative institutions such as the World Health Organization or the Gavi program that the Prime Minister also mentioned in the course of his remarks. All of these ideas are part of and embraced in this notion of global health as public health for the world population as a whole. Now, what of the role of science to advance global health? Oftentimes, there is a tension that we feel between helping with the urgent problems of today that confront us and that demand attention, and investing our resources in the science that can lead to better solutions for the future. It's a dilemma that we, as individual citizens and as policymakers in countries around the world, confront all the time. I think that challenge is framed often in the wrong way. It's framed often as the challenge of trading off research for care. I think the better way to think about it is what amount of our resources should we devote with the existing knowledge and technology to solve the immediate problems before us today, versus what amount of our resources should we invest so that we are in a better position to do a superior job of solving the health problems of the future. And the way to think about it is not research versus care, it's care today versus better care in the future. It's still a trade-off, but it's a trade-off that is really about the present versus the future rather than about investment in knowledge versus investment in treatment. Now, when you think about science for global health, all of the same standards and principles that apply to science anywhere would pertain. We want science that is directed ultimately at solving the most important problems, including the problems of health. We want science that is methodologically sound. We want science that is creative, innovative, imaginative, forward-looking. We want science that is carried out in a highly ethical way. This is always the case. But I would add 3 goals that science for global health also should strive to achieve. The first is that the science should be aimed at solutions that will be universally applicable. Because if we are concerned about health everywhere, we want science to help solve the problems of health everywhere. Secondly, we should have an objective that the end result of the translation of the science should be affordable and able to be applied in countries and circumstances where fewer resources are available. And finally, we should think very carefully also about the needs of implementation of existing knowledge as a scientific challenge, because the science of implementation is equally as challenging as the basic knowledge that underlies the technologies that then need to be implemented. It's basic in its own fundamental way. And so if we think about global health as the health of the whole population, and we think about science for global health as having all of the qualities of science generally, and being universal, being affordable, and being implementable, we'll have brought together the combination of idealism and pragmatism, which is at the foundation of successful science, innovation, and achievement for global health.
Harvey, thank you very much indeed. I think that's an excellent start to the forum, and I think it's something that the other speakers will develop and hopefully will provide a solid basis for our discussion. Second speaker is Professor Rita Colwell. She served as director of the U.S. National Science Foundation and is chairman of Canon U.S. Life Sciences, and a distinguished university professor both at the University of Maryland and at Johns Hopkins University. Her interests have focused on global infectious diseases, water and health, and she's currently developing an international network to address emerging infections and diseases and water issues, including safe drinking water, for both the developed and developing world. As the 11th director of the National Science Foundation between 1998 and 2004, Rita served as co-chair of the Committee on the Science of the National Science and Technology Council. One of her major interests include K-12 science and mathematics education, graduate science and engineering education, and the increased participation of women and minorities in science and engineering. Dr. Colwell has held many advisory positions in the US government, also in non-profit science policy organizations and private foundations. She is an internationally respected and renowned scientist and has co-authored and authored 16 books and more than 700 scientific publications. And she's also produced an award-winning film, Invisible Seas, and has served on editorial boards of numerous journals. Rita.
Thank you, Pallab. We live today in a world where 2.6 billion people lack improved sanitation. Approximately 800 million people lack safe drinking water. 1 billion go to bed hungry. 3 billion people are undernourished, and 1 billion are obese. And 30 to 50% of the world's food production is wasted. Now, these are facts and conditions that are separately stated, but they're interconnected. We really need to understand the link between water, energy, food, and global health, and holistic approach to global health. Now, there are many paths to understanding and implementing solutions. Empowering individuals, especially women who head up families, empowering communities, but also adopting a business model perspective in development projects, and I'll speak about that more in a moment. But most importantly, I think we have to learn not only from our mistakes, but also our successes. Now, safe water offers a fundamentally important example. Today, in a country like Ethiopia, Cambodia, where less than 20% of the population has access to safe drinking water, 200 children out of every 1,000 under the age of 5 will die, and they will die from diarrheal diseases. And I would say the most egregious example of waterborne disease today is Haiti, where 700,000 people have been struck down with cholera, and at least 7,000 deaths recorded to date. On October 20th, 2010, the diarrheal disease cholera flared into a major epidemic throughout the country, and it continues today. About 3 to 5 million people throughout the world are infected by cholera every year, and about 100,000 will die from just that disease. Now, science plays a role in understanding genomes of infectious agents and tracking them. And with the publicly available database on genomes, the epidemiology of diseases like cholera can be monitored and brought to a halt if we can institute safe water for the population. And by the way, here at the University of Oslo, Professor Krendal discovered the structure of the cholera toxin and the fact that type O blood type are highly susceptible because of the interactions of the blood type with those individuals. There's been an evolution, indeed a revolution, in understanding infectious diseases. Again, using diarrheal disease, cholera as an example, employing genome sequencing, that is, extracting DNA from a clinical sample from a cholera victim who has entered the cholera hospital in Calcutta, India, we determined that of 50 cases examined to date, all had not just the cholera bacterium causing cholera, but 3 to 10 other infectious agents. Yes, cholera was there, Vibrio cholera, but also Salmonella, Shigella, rotavirus, Giardia, Campylobacter, Helicobacter pylori. A total of 26 pathogens are disseminated in unsafe, sewage-polluted drinking water. And these patients in Calcutta whose samples we analyzed averaged about 4 or 5 pathogens along with the cholera bacterium. So in this age of genomics, we need to rethink infectious diseases as a community of pathogens rather than a single pathogen causing the disease. Now, how to provide safe drinking water? For a socially disrupted country, those at war, or for remote villagers of Bangladesh, women in households can use a simple filter to treat water for their household. They can collect water from the rivers and ponds as they do, but by just filtering through cloth or sari cloth, the risk of cholera can be reduced by 50%, as has been shown in a 3-year study several years ago. For communities in Uttar Pradesh, India, and Ghana, the Safe Water Network has installed kiosks to provide filtered water and employing a business model. Initial capital investment of $50,000 to $70,000 to construct these prefabricated kiosks, train the individuals to operate the filtration units, and then charge a very, very modest fee to cover only cost. This becomes a self-sufficient enterprise, and it's accomplishable within 3 to 5 years. And most important, schistosomiasis has been documented by the team from Johns Hopkins led by Kellogg Schwab, that these kiosks reduce schistosomiasis by 80%, as well as other diarrheal diseases. We're only beginning to see the application of genomics to medicine and global health. There's a whole world of microorganisms that lives within our gut and on our skin, acting as a defending army to protect us against the bad guy, bacteria, and viruses. Our human microbiome, I guess, is a new version of the Socratic doctrine, know thyself and to thyself be true. Hippocrates in the 4th century BC said, whoever wishes to pursue the science of medicine must first investigate the seasons of the year and what occurs in them. Those wise words spoken centuries ago serve as a cornerstone for what we can now describe today as global environmental health. With satellites fixed with remote sensors, we now know that predictive models can be developed to provide early warning of environmental conditions. And we've been able to link cholera, malaria, other disease outbreaks to conditions of temperature, rainfall in the Bay of Bengal, in Africa, in Latin America. Similarly to cholera in Mozambique, Africa, and to the cholera epidemic of Latin America, we can now pursue the times of the year, the locales, where these outbreaks will occur. In fact, in the Chesapeake Bay, when and where it's most likely that a bacterium that it causes the lethal infection will be most abundant can be determined by satellite. So I would say that we need to understand that in the environment, in soil, in rodents, even in our domestic animals, agents of plague, anthrax, tularemia, SARS, Ebola, and other environmentally mediated diseases occur. And many human diseases have their main reservoirs in rural areas, far from population centers. So we need a One Health, bringing together human medicine and veterinary medicine together to solve some of these disease problems. I close with the words of John Muir, founder of the Sierra Club. He was born in 1838. He died in 1914. John Muir said, when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he, and I would add, and she, finds it hitched to the rest of the universe. Thank you.
Rita, thank you very much. I'm fascinated. Harvey should have got a round of applause too, but we just didn't get into the swing of things at that time, so let's give him one now. No, fascinating stuff. Rita, you seem to be suggesting that we need to be thinking smarter, but also appropriately, and you're comments on the use of remote sensing are fascinating, and I put a marker down to do a story on it for BBC News, so now any other journalists keep off that story. Our next speaker is Alice Dautry. She served as president of the Institut Pasteur since 2005. She's also a professor and the head of the Biology of Cell Interaction Unit at the Institute. Dr. Dautry received her training as a solid-state physicist and for some reason decided to become a molecular biologist at the University of New York. I'm saying as a physicist myself. And at the National Institutes of Health. She was a visiting scientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and professor at the École Polytechnique. Her research focuses on cell biology, host pathogen interactions, and cellular microbiology and receptors of the immune system, among other areas. She has a long-standing involvement in educational activities. Currently, she serves as a member of the External Reference Group for Health Research, strategy of the World Health Organization. She also serves on several boards, including those of the École Polytechnique. Alice, if you would like to give your talk.
Thank you. I would like to say how grateful I am to Fred Kavli and the Kavli Foundation for putting together this roundtable and for inviting us. And I would start maybe with an optimistic note. I mean, we have all learned the hard way that we are living in an international village. And global health is really the question of international village. And at time of economic crisis and difficult times in the world, we can be overwhelmed by the difficulties that we see in the world. And which is why I like to start with an optimistic note. It's already very striking that there is a round table at the Kavli Foundation about this theme, and that the Prime Minister came and told us how Norway is involved and how he himself is involved. And this is, to me, very important. It's also striking that for the last few years, the G8 or the G20 have put on their agenda the topic of global health. 10 years ago, it did not exist. So I see a big change in the world about the topic, and just realizing that we all live together and we have to take all the problems of health for all of us because there is no other way, is a big change to me. And there are a few examples of success. Of course, there is a polio, but I would like to talk about another one, which is a malaria. It's very striking that in 2010, WHO announced that a 50% reduction in the number of cases of malaria by distributing impregnated bed nets. And this is an international collective effort. So it's really important. Another one I would like to discuss is HIV. And then again, the Prime Minister mentioned how quickly we had come from the first cases of the disease to diagnosis and treatment. And of course, it doesn't go fast enough, but never has science gone so fast. So we need to remember that. And this is a result from excellent basic science, but also there are some countries, although they are rare, which are showing that they are really improving for treatment for HIV. And I'm thinking of Uganda, for instance, which really has shown that the number of people living with HIV has decreased. So this is for the optimistic note. Of course, I don't live in a naive world, and I travel a lot, so I know also what's going on in real life. But I would like to come to 3 points, because I think that Rita and Harvey have covered a lot of topics. I would like to make 3 points, mainly in my intervention before discussion. The first one is that science has brought a lot of remarkable solutions. But very often in global health, we are facing crisis. And as a result, we need to act, and governments, NGOs, and everybody wants to do something because there is a crisis. So often we react for crisis, and we get organized, and we get money, and we send help, and we buy medicine, vaccines. And there, it's often done on scientific basis. First, I would like to insist on the fact that the policy decisions must be based on scientific evidence, even in case of crisis. It's not so easy because the pressure is very high, the public pressure, the pressure on politicians, the pressure on people making decisions is difficult, and sometimes you need to slow down just to make decisions based on science. What I find we're not as good as, and where science has a lot to bring, is on following up our interventions. I mean, there is not enough good science to measure the results and impacts of what we have done in interventions. Have the goals been reached the way we wanted? Have we measured everything under scientific criteria? There is not enough data. I mean, we do things with a lot of goodwill in the world, and we don't follow up for years to see what really is happening. And I think we could learn how to be much more efficient, and their science says to do more. And as scientists, I think we don't do enough. So maybe this is something I would like to insist on. I would like to give 2 examples. You know, when I was talking about malaria having improved so much, I remember the initial times when bed nets were distributed. And of course, the population who are most at risk are children and pregnant women. But in countries, of course, they were distributed, but the men are the most important people, so the bed nets were going to the men, because who is important in the family? Not the child and not the woman, right? So and even in some cases, they were used for fishing nets because it was more important to get food. So measuring what's really happening, of course, this is a very simple example, but there are more complicated ones. For instance, when we launch vaccination campaigns, sometimes it can affect the circulations of infectious agents, and new serotypes may come and emerge or appear more important because we are doing a campaign of vaccination for something else. So we need to measure what's going on. I mean, indeed, we launch a vaccination campaign. Is it effective the way we want? What else is circulating? What is the epidemiology? And again, there is not enough done. And maybe one last point of the same kind is we tend to do clinical assays for medical treatment in rich countries, the United States and Europe. And we tend to do them more on men. And then, of course, you use this treatment in other countries and on different kinds of population, different cultures, different surroundings, different genetics. And sometimes it doesn't work the way we want. So it means we also need to do research and clinical assays in the countries. And it's not so simple. You cannot just transfer even great results of science. So I think we need to do more research to measure the impact and consequences. And we must encourage evaluation and investment in global health to ensure that they really have the effect that we wanted. The second point I would like to insist on is the question of global health policies and relationship in collaboration between the North and the South. This is very important to me and very close to my heart, so I want to insist on that. I really feel that we need to empower developing countries who are suffering most of some of this disease and not consider that we are coming from Europe or the United States, rich countries, that we can bring our solutions. I don't think it's sustainable in the long term. I think the best solutions can come locally, precisely because local people know better their own context, and they can adapt some of the discoveries that have been made maybe in the North. But in order for global health solutions to be sustainable, it must be taken up by local people, and they must solve the problems. And I could give the examples later on in discussions. But it means very directly that we need to strengthen capacities. We cannot have any sustainable solution for global health if we do not sustain capacities. And sustain capacities means educate people. It means having research in the countries. I don't think it's enough to do research in big universities like mine. I don't think it's enough. I think we need to train people, and they are the ones who are going to take over in their countries. Otherwise, we will find solutions by pouring euros or dollars or Norwegian money for 2 or 3, 4 years, but it's not going to be sustainable. So we need these people to be trained, and we also need to have them the cutting-edge technology so that they can do the research themselves in their own countries and regions in the world. The goal is to give local populations the means to conduct their own research. So in this respect, we must also, I feel, discuss guidelines of what the collaboration should be between richer countries and less rich countries. And this would include issues which are sensitive, such as data sharing and intellectual property sharing. And I don't think we can just ignore it, so I'm just putting my feet, there. It's very important, and it needs to be discussed, because otherwise, again, in the long run, it doesn't work. And we all remember the crisis there was at the time of H5, of the avian flu, with some countries refusing to give the strains. And the debate, I think, is not close yet. So it has to be put in the open and discussed. And finally, and I am, of course, trained as a physicist, I'm a molecular biologist, but I would like to insist on multidisciplinary research and say that health is not only a hard science, a medical science problem. I think we need to reinforce collaboration between social science, political science, anthropology, medical science, and all the kinds of science. And this is not done enough, because the problem of global health are completely multidisciplinary, and again, we are not going to solve it if we don't put together the scientists of all the disciplines to solve it. So this is, again, to me, very, very important and not done enough. So I would insist on that point. So finally, I really feel that without improving global health in this world, there cannot be economic development in the world. I don't see how women in Africa, when their kid is sick all the time, can work. And they are an incredible driving force for the economy. So not solving the problem of health means that you don't solve the economic problem. And if you don't solve the economic problem, then you get into conflicts between countries. And so it means no peace in this world. So I really feel it's so fundamental and so basic that we all need to deal with it. And I would like, again, to acknowledge what Norway, which is quite a small country, is doing and putting it on its agenda. There are other small countries I'm thinking of who are also doing it, and I would like to say how impressed I am and honored to be here in Norway to discuss this topic. Thank you.
Alice, thanks very much indeed. And you raised the issue of empowerment, which is often talked about, but it seems not achieved. And I think that perhaps one of the reasons for it is that it is so complex, and funders don't like complexity. News journalists like myself don't like complexity. We love being there for the photo opportunity at the beginning, but don't follow up on evaluation as to how well it's worked and how it could be improved. And you sort of posed one of the solutions yourself in terms of diversifying some of the funding mechanisms, which is what our next speaker, Professor Kiyoshi Kurokawa, will talk about. He's professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and Science Advisor to the Cabinet of Japan. He's recently completed a report on Fukushima, which makes very good reading. He's also a member of the President's Council of the University of Tokyo, and also Emeritus Professor at the University of Tokyo, Senior Scientist of the Earth Institute, Columbia University, Governor of the Japan Chapter of the American College of Physicians, and Chairman of the Health Policy Institute in Japan. Dr. Kurokawa is also former President of the Science Council of Japan, and the Pacific Science Association. He served on many ministerial committees, is highly respected both in Japan and across the world, and he was he won the Order of Purple from the government of Japan for his excellence in academic achievements in 1999. Professor Kurokawa, Kiyoshi,
yes.
Please start.
I think global health is the issue, as we discussed already, but I think everything, even basic science, require funding and job and to support jobs, that's money, right? So that I think I'm really grateful for this Dr. Kavli's endeavor to support basic science in very difficult, like nanoscience and brain science, and also frontier in astrophysics and astrology. Great. And I have been very grateful for your invitation to join this ceremony this year. Great. Let's see. Even basic science and global health, there are many solutions in the world. I think we live in more interconnected and interdependent one world, and as Dr. Fineberg stated, this is just like national policy and health in one global world. And we see so much poverty. Sometimes we may see in your own country, but I think the global magnitude is massive. Maybe top 1% of a wealthy person capture more than 99% of the rest of the world. And in this connected world, they see the inequity and unfairness in the world we live. And they become so angry. And they may have not noticed such a difference, sort of inequity and state of the world. And so the government carry a major issue in this global health and also national health policy. This is sort of by tax money of each citizens, and they go through very bureaucratic and political process, and perhaps global health issues through bilateral overseas development assistance, or maybe multilateral through like World Bank and WHO and the UN and the institutions, and that happens. But this is kind of from government to government with top-down, more bureaucratic and time-taking processes, and less cost-effective because the program may not be less cost-conscious and outcome-driven. I mean, that is a different thing. So that has been conventional, top-down, government to government. It's quite dependent on the governance of the donor government and also the governance of recipient government, which has been a major issue. But now see that most of the donor country have stuck into the economic stagnancy, and so that I think there's a lot of political issues into even domestic policies. So now, where's the next way to go? Maybe over the last 10 to 20 years, I think there's a massive emergence of so-called NGOs, more bottom-up and driven by empathy, and which is great. I think at least certain review shows more than half of this NGO type of thing, education and health, are created and led by women, which is a great thing to do. And I think they are really fighting for this financial support, which quite often very difficult to secure and become sustainable. So there may be a praise for this more creative finance mechanism, which emerges very recently. One is so-called microfinance led by Professor Yunus, and which now spread out to more than 60 countries to support such a thing, even within your country's basic sort of inequity, including health, education, and many other things. And in fact, Dr. Yunus told me too, I think he never sort of lease and lend his money to men, because I think they just have only women, because when they return all the debts, I think they spend the money to the children and health and of their villages and their family. So that's a basic difference in, that is where the women, gender empowerment become a very important issue, even in Japan, which is quite behind, and Norway is quite top in these parameters. So these are the bottom-up, more passionate and more like down to the earth, but I think somehow ownership and other thing is may not become more like widening and capturing the wider audience quite often. But now philanthropy came into the place, like in science, Kavli and other foundation, but represented, for example, by Gates. And I think for this wealth is coming back to the global issue, which because of their business background and also cost-conscious policy, And they create a various innovative policy to sort of combine and fill the gap between top-down, government-to-government, more bureaucratic process into more bottom-up, which may require more funding and professional sort of support. But I think by giving that kind of more private money into that, that functions as a catalyst to make this bottom-up to top-down into common goals one step further and further, which is a great thing to do. And I think some other private sector may have been coming into play. Obviously, like so-called CSR, corporate social responsibility, has been one of the champion keywords, pushing all the private sector to contribute to global issues, and that's true. But I think in a view of stagnant economy in affluent countries and emerging new sort of economy in different parts of the world, I think this has to be taken as an opportunity for private sector. Private sector could invest on different countries, for example, like African growing economies, not only as a CSR. This has to become have to be recognized by strategic corporate investment for branding, and I think capturing the future customer of your product, or whatever the service and product. I think you have to really change the mindset of corporate directors. I think that's, I have been arguing this and pushing them to think this is not the CSR, this is a strategic branding of your future customers. And I think that kind of public pressure will be very important, particularly for the policy too. And another one is also catalyze such a sort of perception. It's a public-private partnership, which public sector would join some arm in arm with the government, and also bilateral, and things become more effective. And there are many new, very innovative entrepreneurial things have been happening in this interconnected world. For example, appearance of patient capital, which is A to Z. I think everybody mentioned about BedNet, which I'm very grateful because this is a product of Sumitomo Chemical Company, which is a proud Japanese firm, which is fine. But I'm telling them they had now 3 factories in Tanzania, and I think they are not taking any profit out of it. But I think who is investing on this company in Tanzania? That's A to Z, patient capital. You know, so the important thing is any program has to create a local job through this process. That is a very important element. And so any innovators tend to make a certain process in that country and donor recipient country and community to create a new job for the youth and their community people. I think that is A to Z is one of the patient capital. It's a long-term investment. And creative finance, I think as we are told, I think Gavi is another one which is about 10-year history of so-called sort of private and public partnership. But I think this is good because I think this is not through your tax money, but you can choose by buying the bond of 7 countries, like Norway is a champion. If you want to buy a bond of Norway, how you want to buy it? How you can buy this? I think there's a window of opportunity for you to buy Norway bond and also bonds of UK and South Africa, and I think that seems to be promising. So you buy, and this bond, your money, will be used for vaccine, and which is a great opportunity. This is a very creative finance, and I see you are rather not paying tax to the government, but rather buying this bond. I think that's maybe a great choice for individual investment. And that kind of more and more sort of creative things is happening. And I think the principle of this is entrepreneurship and innovation. But to do that, I think you have to go to that local community and see how fortunate you are in living such a sort of safe and advanced country, but what kind of small thing can meet a basic need of that recipient country. I think if you go there, all of a sudden you begin to see your advantage, how lucky you are, and how the small thing can contribute to improve the state of the health and in the local community. And to do that, and all of a sudden you're beginning to connect it to the local people and your company and become one world. I think there are many youngsters that are so creative. They are creating many, many new things and beyond our imagination. For example, like Kickstart International, creating a new job on the line, and D-Lab and D-Light, and that's a great stuff. I mean, they are doing their job, and just working together with your peers in recipient country, impoverished country, and D-Line and Table 4 to just name a few. There's so many new opportunity and new enterprises emerging. And that's the only thing you have to do is just publicize your thing, and Twitter and blog and whatever you do. And that is a new way to go. Thank you.
Kiyoshi, sorry to cut you short, but the reason for it is that we very much want participation from the audience here to give your thoughts. This is a unique opportunity to talk to some esteemed panelists, but also an esteemed audience. It's also being, it's a matter of record. The whole forum is being written up by science writer Julie Clayton, so this will be a document that will be used internationally. So do think about some comments and questions and deliver them from the heart, just as our panelists have done. Say what you really mean, because you've just got this one opportunity. And for those who are watching the webcast, do also send in your comments as well. So before I open it to the floor, I'm just going to take the chairman's prerogative and ask the opening question. Harvey, at the beginning, you set out guidelines for what global health should be about, that it should be universal and implementable across the globe, it should be affordable, and it should be acceptable to the community. Now, clearly that doesn't happen in all the cases. I was just wondering what you and the other panelists thought were some of the obstacles of, that were getting in the way, and also if you want to take up any points that your colleagues have mentioned and talk to them as well. Sure. Harvey.
Well, thank you, Pallab. I'll comment first on the specific question you raised. I was very impressed, actually, with the point that Alice raised on the question of collaboration, partnership, and the relationships north to south, which I would say also are south to south, north to north, and south to north, to supplement the point she was making. But the importance of collaboration and the importance of a mentality and a frame of thinking that appreciates the culture, the values, the needs, the prerogatives, and the rights of the countries and individuals who are most in need. And I think that a great deal of the problem that sometimes arises because of distance, because of lack of understanding, a lack of empathy, a reluctance to yield authority. All of these problems could be compensated quite a lot if we had a stronger sense of exactly the frame of thinking that was discussed in terms of collaboration and partnership. Just as one other observation, if I may, I was very struck so far with the whole spectrum of research and the meanings of research that has come up in our discussion. We've talked about everything from the kind of most fundamental scientific inquiry without clear notion at the outset as to what it might mean, the genomic studies of microorganisms or of humans, or the relationships of animals and humans. The applied but still very fundamental work on, for example, developing an effective vaccine against HIV, or a universal vaccine for influenza. The kinds of research that were mentioned, the basic research around the evaluation of procedures, the multidisciplinary character of research needs, the importance of research on remote sensing, the relevance of and very fundamental needs in the whole spectrum of implementation. It's a daunting question to think about parsing the array of needs and opportunities and allocating the resources to both advance knowledge and advance on problem solving at the same time. When a commission that was co-led by John Evans and Adi Lucas of Nigeria, John Evans of Canada, Adi Lucas of Nigeria, on research needs. At that time, the thinking was for the developing world. They actually decided ultimately to refer to the research that they felt was important as essential health research. They wanted to dissolve the false dichotomies between basic and applied. They wanted to emphasize those strategies which brought together a sufficient emphasis on the most fundamental knowledge to the most applied. And they used this term essential as a way of representing a neutral call to the best strategy to ultimately lead to the most benefit for health. And I think that I at least came back to that thought as I was listening to my colleagues reflect on their perspectives on research as where the need was. We ought to think about what's essential for us to achieve the progress we want to do.
And just brief follow-ups from the rest of you before the audience joins in. Rita?
Well, I would like to emphasize the point you made, Pallab, that low-tech has an important role, I think, in global health. And we always turn toward the very high technology approaches when, in fact, we're being highly reductionist, and what we need to be is much more expansive and holistic. Just coming back to my favorite hobby horse, and that is providing safe water. You immediately deal with 26 pathogens, immediately deal with a host of diseases. And it's simple, it's not complicated. It can be as simple as filtration in a remote village to a much more complicated device that will deal with a community and with a country. So I wish there were a way that, as my colleagues have pointed out, that we could take into account culture of the country and the communities, and also to understand how powerful it is to educate the women in the family. Because after all, it's the old adage, you teach a man to fish and you've fed a family. So I think the emphasis on high tech is terrific, but I think we need a balance with some of the simpler solutions that can be implemented very quickly. It would be, I think, to me, fantastic to be able to introduce clean water in Haiti and simple, clear sanitation. We could do more for that country than anything else I think we could do.
The solution's simple, but implementing it is complex, and picking the right researchers. Alice and Kiyoshi, just sort of very briefly.
Yes, I was also very struck as Harvey by the way science and research was coming up. I mean, it's a topic of the roundtable, but usually when we discuss about global health, we discuss more about intervention, how to get money to give treatment, and so on. Striking to me also to hear how much research has to do with it. And even research in innovative way to fund this research. I was very striking what Ghosh is reminding us, that we are in a different world and we are not using enough the creativity even of the financing solutions, which are quite incredible. And so
I suppose it's a corporate-dominated industry, if you like, global public health.
Yes, but the
corporations have done a lot of good, but...
Right, but a lot of small initiatives which are so incredibly creative and come with ideas and can be really solution. So, in a way, it's very exciting because, I feel that, well, we may have more solutions if we put together our minds to it.
And Kiyoshi, just your thoughts on what your fellow panelists have said.
Right. I think maybe how to transfer low-tech into where the needs are, because that's the deployment, the implementation, that is the key. And I think everybody would tend to think high-tech and the science advanced, but I think all the technology are there, most of the sanitation and water, and just simple health issues. And I think with IT now, 80% of people in the world has access to mobile phone, and new phones are more likely to be smartphone, so they see that. And for example, like if malaria, I say just stick a needle and put on the grass, and just they shot a picture and just send it to somewhere, and they make a diagnosis, you do it to that. And so there's many, many innovative ways to solve one step further. It's not high tech, how to deploy it. And this is the connected world. There's so many new sort of bright entrepreneurs, I think, just working together from south to north and south to south, and it's a great thing.
Great. Well, now it's your turn. There are roving microphones. If you'd also say who you are and, if relevant, where you're from. What I'll do is, rather than kind of take one question and then ask the panel, then I'm just going to take a few questions at a time, and then we'll just see how it goes. The lady in the second row there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And keep your hands up who wants to, just as I get an idea of...
Well, my name is Reidun Sirovåg. I am a professor of microbiology, former Secretary General of the Academy, as some of you will know. And I would like to thank the audience for sharing their thoughts with us about global health. I would like to go a little bit back to the role of basic science and bring that in for a moment. And many of us here have worked within basic science, where the aim, of course, has been to obtain knowledge and understanding without any except maybe for applications for the Research Council. That's some ideas about what practice this could have, as you all know. And we have numerous examples of how results from this kind of basic science have been used, surprisingly sometimes, in medicine. And this goes back even 200 years or more, since Jenner understood the basis of vaccine with the smallpox, which eradicated eventually smallpox from the world. And there are lots of things in physics. You have X-ray, you have from chemistry, you have from information biology, you have all these things that have led to findings that can be used. And then this gets, in a way, a little bit complicated, because you have so many levels when you have talking about health. You have global health, as you have been mainly concentrated on. You have public health, here in Norway, say, and you have individual health. And what has surprised me a little bit is that even the results from genomics and the human microbiome, which is a fairly new thing, which is also based on knowledge from basic science originally. It's been used so much for promoting personal medicine. So and the individuality, and that's sort of what people want to hear about. And since we have limited resources, I'm very glad that the Prime Minister said that he is interested in basic research, and we all fight for the money. But I would like to hear maybe your opinion about this contradiction, because it all ends up to make priorities. And I agree so much with what you all have said, and we see, you know, if only 10% get benefit from this, and still, you know, still talking about how could I improve my genome personally. So and also these new things are happening so fast, and they are so expensive. So I would like to have the panel's opinion on this.
Sure, I know I sort of get a spread of questions, but that's such an important question that it's worth going straight to you. It's outside of your control, sort of senior and influential as you are. Governments and societies will spend money on the things that it feels to be important, and you have this contradiction. You raised it right at the start, Harvey, that relatively small portion goes on a problem that affects the entire world, but and also translating it and testing its effectiveness. You know, it's just not being done. I mean, is it something that can change? Is it through lobbying, or, you know, what needs to be done? Harvey first, I guess.
Just as a first response, when you look honestly at our allocation of resources as compared to where they would do the most good, there are some obvious discrepancies. We know generally we underinvest in prevention compared to treatment. We miss opportunity to invest in ways that will prevent the disease from starting before you experience the consequence. To take the example, we celebrate the triumph of treatment of HIV, and I am second to none in my enthusiasm for the progress that has been made. But think for a moment what it would mean to have a truly preventive HIV vaccine and avoid all of the personal trauma and cost of the disease as we know it. So prevention is a clear underinvestment. Frankly, I think we can say we underinvest in research relative to allocation of dollars for current needs. And I believe we underinvest because we undervalue the benefit of improved opportunity for care for the next generation. So that's another discrepancy. Many of our countries, and I think it varies, but we waste tremendous amounts of money in our health systems on ineffective and sometimes dangerous treatments. Sometimes this is a matter of policy, sometimes it's a matter of inadequate oversight and regulation, sometimes it's a matter of inadequate training and conditioning, but fundamentally it's a shortcoming in the design of our health systems to not simply make it possible to deliver safe and effective care, but to make it impossible to deliver unsafe and ineffective care. There are many ways, I think, if you begin to look broadly at how we can successfully intervene. On the specific point of the genome and individualized medicine, I think that we are barely at the beginning of seeing any real consequence of the genomic revolution for either personal or public health. I believe deeply in time we will see dramatic improvements on both fronts, growing out of increased knowledge and understanding of the genome and its translation into the proteome and the whole of its consequences for function in a physiologic and human way. But on that question, I think we can say almost equally it has not yet yielded the promise of the future, either for the individual or for the public health.
Rita and Alice, do you think that it's a structural problem because the pots of money are in large corporate organisations? They've got to spend it in a way that satisfies its own stated research needs. And Alice, you were talking about more devolution in research, and there simply isn't the mechanism for, I suppose, development agencies to kind of spend their money making other people look good rather than they themselves looking good.
I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding on the part of the public and the taxpayers with respect to what basic research is and does. For example, let's just take laser surgery. Charlie Townsend, the physicist, when he was puttering around the laboratory, wasn't thinking about having a device that would allow very precise surgery. That was actually an accident. A student was lining up the laser and it penetrated his eye. He was taken to the emergency room and the doctor was fascinated by this tiny, perfect hole, and from there, the rest is history. The public doesn't really understand that it's the fundamental science that underpins these discoveries. And in the case of genomics, I think we will see a big breakthrough in the next few years in accurate, rapid diagnostics of microorganisms. Right now, when you go into a physician's office and you're being treated for what seems to be a cold or whatever, you will be given his or her best guess as the antibiotic or the treatment to be used. However, I think within the next year, you will be able to go in to the physician's office and there will be an ability to identify precisely through the genome of the isolate from the specimen what it is and what it's sensitive to, plus the fact what else is there and what else may or may not be sensitive to the antibiotic that you end up having used. So we're on the edge of it. It's going to happen, but it's fundamental research. And the National Science Foundation, for example, I can't resist saying this, is so severely underfunded. It's probably close to $7 billion right now, but the NIH is funded at about 36 or 37 billion. NASA, they complain, but it's 17 to 19 billion. And it's the fundamental research from the National Science Foundation. As Sarah Varmus once said, pull aside the curtain, the lever in the hand is the fundamental scientist of the engine.
And this level of funding from the most pro-science president for a long time, so goodness knows what the future holds. Alice, your point about devolution of research and the ability for local decision-making, I mean, it sounds like a great idea, but it's never really going to happen, is it, because of the way things are?
Well, it's happening slowly, and because it's a long-term goal. And you know, you were asking earlier, we talk about capacity building. Why does it not happen so much? I think it's something that takes years, so you need to be patient. Intervention goes quickly. You know, it takes a year, 2, 3, 4. Getting people trained in the country and getting them equipped and getting them to do things themselves and do research the time it takes to train a scientist, so 10 years. And so we have to have long-term goals. But as I think Harvey was saying earlier, we don't measure enough, and maybe we think for the short term. We don't measure enough the consequences in 5 or 10 years of our actions today. We already are trying to solve the problem of today. And especially the politicians who are elected every 4 years, for instance, in some countries, are very busy with already that. So it's not so simple, and it's a long-term goal, and this is why it's not happening enough. But it is happening slowly, and I think it has a lot of consequences when it happens, so it's really important. About money in research and genomics, I think, shortly we will see results also in disease affecting poor countries, because there are studies on genetics of population showing sensitivity or resistance either to an infectious disease or to diabetes or to whatever, which will affect everybody, including people in underdeveloped countries. And as a result, there can be specific measures of prevention or education. So I don't know what personal medicine will become in rich countries, but I think it can be used also, at least in genomics, in addition to Rita was saying about microbes, but also for people. So we will see the result very shortly, I think, from that. We already have patients who are resistant to AIDS infection, and understanding that gives some information on why you are more sensitive to getting infection or not. So I think results will come.
Kiyoshi, could your new innovative systems break down some of these barriers?
Yeah, one thing, I think every country, because of this benefit of improving health over the last 100 years, like the Nobel Prize started in 1901, so if you see who got the Nobel Prize over 100 years, they have major breakthrough at that time of the major issue. Like ABO blood type was discovered in 1900. And I think Landsteiner got the prize 30 years later. So that's, we take it for granted. But I think in this world, science is borderless, more and more borderless. So why so many U.S. got the Nobel, like Kavli laureate this year? So that shows, and also how about Dr. Kavli? He was Norwegian, but I think he did all the career in the U.S. and California, and he's back and somehow found the foundation is somehow owned by Norway. Why is that? Because that's a patriotic feeling. But science is borderless. So you have your own nation, but science career is borderless. So I think to convince your national public, which is aged population, has more voting power, and how you deal with pensions and health care in your own country. So that's a very political domestic issue. But let's see science. That's a borderless frontier. So I think narrowing your gap, because you want to have a healthy life, right? So that means you like to have a healthy family, right? That means you like to have a healthy nation, right? And in this global world, I think who are the sufferers? I mean, that's what it is. So unless you have very in not fragile, more governed country with rising economy, that's fine. They take care of their own domestic sort of inequity. But in the fragile, like Syria and all the unstable country, I think that could affect you and us. I mean, so why not? And just narrowing the gap is one of the major issues. Make interconnected world more stable for next generation for sure.
Thank you, Kiyoshi. Now, this time I do promise to try and get a few comments in and then hand it back to the panel. So if you put your hand up and leave your hand up. So let me just get the gentleman there who's close to the microphone, and if you can get the lady there as well to speak next. Hello. Hello. Have you just got a microphone? So.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Roger Dunham, internal medicine from Santa Barbara, with a question relating to the implementation of healthcare issues for the benefit of the population. And while I understand the need to improve in the healthcare of developing countries and the issues that have been brought up are compelling, there is, in more developed countries like the United States, an evolving issue which I think will create ever-increasing problems in the implementation and delivery to the patient, the health care that each patient needs. And this comes down to the basic fact that the population is getting older, and as the seniority increases in the population, the magnitude of health problems associated with older people becomes exponentially greater. The healthcare issues associated with those problems become increasingly challenging to the primary care doctors, who are struggling at this time to understand an ever-increasing amount of science with each problem. And the number of primary care physicians available, currently in medical school, only 2% are going into primary care, is becoming less and less. With these problems emerging and increasing at a rate that the word tsunami is probably appropriate in the next 10 to 15 years, and the number of doctors are decreasing, while the emergency rooms are filling with patients that can't get care, what areas of this matter have been addressed, and what solutions are possible for the future?
Great. Thank you. And the lady over there.
Is this okay? Yeah, okay. My name is Ellen Ewald. I am a partner at TISVAR, located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And since one of the topics we are focusing on this week is neuroscience, I'm wondering if you could comment on the world, a comment that came out of the World Health Organization, where they say there is no good health unless there is good mental health. And if you take into consideration what's going on in the developing world, I'm wondering if some of you could perhaps comment on that connection between mental health and physical health, and especially as it relates to developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman in a very nice shirt there.
I'm Orlando Arcello from the United States of America, President-elect for the Material Research Society next year. I've been working for the last 10 years in a big project funded by mandate of Congress of the United States through DOE to develop an artificial retina to restore sight to people blinded by genetically induced degeneration of the photoreceptors. We got to a device in 2010 with 270 electrodes that returned partial vision to people who have been blind for many years by retinitis pigmentosa and macular degeneration. And second side, the company involved in the project went to FDA on January 2010 to ask for approval to implant it commercially. December 2010, nothing happened. So they came to the European community on January 2011. They got the approval on July 2011, and they implanted the first artificial retina commercially in Pisa, Italy, in October 11, 2011. So I am interested to learning from our colleagues from Europe what message can I bring to Congress in the United States to how we can speed up this approval, because these are devices that are impacting the quality of life and people want them. And you seem to have a better handle on that than we in the United States.
So I thought the FDA was so popular in your country.
Pardon me?
Nothing. And I'll just take one more. Julie. I think you're the nearest person, so could you pass the microphone? Yeah.
Yes, Gene Block, I'm Chancellor at UCLA, and my question is, and I think Dr. Fineberg mentioned the importance of international teams to solve global health problems, so the need for international collaboration, and yet you look at most funding agencies like in the US, NIH, if you try to get an international team, it can be very hard to qualify international investigators. If you go to NSF, the binational agreements can often still be very complicated to coordinate between international organizations. Is there a problem? Is there a better solution to really promote international research more than it occurs today?
Thank you. Well, let's take those in turn. Alice, could you advise the gentleman from America about the painfully slow process that they have in the United States and how we've got it perfect in Europe?
I'm not sure it's so perfect in Europe. I'm glad to hear it is. No, honestly, I cannot, because it's a specific case, and so I guess we will look into it. I really cannot.
You don't think there is an issue of kind of the US system being any better or worse than Europe?
No, I don't think, I don't think Europe is so much better all the time. I mean, I'm glad to hear it, but I'm not sure. I think it's an issue, actually, but probably the issue is that medicine has become so legal, quote unquote, and people can be sued so easily for all kinds of reasons that a lot of cautions are taken, sometimes a bit too much. And I don't want to discuss on this case, but I've seen other cases which I feel are very upsetting, where because the regulatory agencies and agents have responsibility and personal responsibility, and they know they can be sued, and a lot of people are going to sue them, they open the umbrella and the sunscreen and to protect themselves. But nobody is discussing the fact that they are not allowing it, what kind of difficulties creating to people, and they cannot be sued because they did not allow a medicine that would help this person. And this goes much beyond FDA or Europe. It's the same with some other agencies putting vaccines on the market in the third world. Nobody's asking them, well, if there is a big epidemic, you're no treatment. How many people are going to be killed because you could not decide? And I think we should think about it. Where is the responsibility? And then there is a legal problem. You can sue because your doctor has not treated you well, do you think? But you don't sue because a company or an agency has not put the medicine quickly enough on the market that maybe could have helped you. So I guess I'm answering by a question which is not exactly what you wanted, maybe, but I think there is a problem of too much law.
Caution because of the law.
Yes, because people are being sued for anything all the time. And so they don't want to take risk. And today, I mean, Pasteur made the first vaccine for rabies. He would never do it today.
It's a worrying thought. And
not the way it was done,
And the gentleman's comments were sort of meant for the US, but I'm sure it's a common theme for many industrialized countries. The time bomb that's taking away of many health issues and our lack of preparedness. Kiyoshi, do you want to start on that?
That is a common issue, I think. Major health policy issue in any so-called advanced country, I think, are stuck with lack of economic growth and aging society, rapidly aging, and widening income gaps. And major disease burden is non-communicable disease, lifestyle-related hypertension, obesity, and diabetes. And I think why you're eating 3 times a day, knowing you're obese. So I think there must be something. This has to be covered by public money. And there must be a lot of basic public payment, but I think a lot of room for private industry to come in, because now you have a choices to exercise or eat 3 times a day. So I think that has to be one of the major issues on the health policy. And when we talk about the global issue, not much economic growth, and you're dealing with pension plans and democratic society, it's a hard thing to do and convince your general public, let's invest more on global health. That's a kind of a very difficult challenge as a political leadership. So that's the issue.
Yes.
I'd like to take a positive perspective. I agree with my colleagues, but I think that we're entering into the world of big data and data analyses that are going to give us some solutions. And I think it's a very poignant question about primary care and the increasingly older population. But I think what one of my panelists, I forget which one, said earlier, that we are not analyzing outcomes. We're not doing the studies properly. And if we could do those kinds of analyses, we could then have the appropriate solutions for a larger group of people. I think this is true also with respect to the gentleman's point about vision and the DOE studies and the neuroscience question. I think with, for example, the huge database that's now developing, that's becoming global, I think, again, we'll be able to search through it and come up with some solutions. It's not a panacea, but I think it'll guide us. Now, I came from a meeting last week in Stockholm talking about food and water, and it was pointed out, the question was, how can we feed 10 billion people in another 20 or 30 years? And it was pointed out that if you analyze the wastage right now and found better ways of deployment, we can today feed 9 or 10 billion people. So it's a matter, I think, of using science, computer science, network science, mathematics, to develop models that allow us to come to some solutions. And then finally, the point about difficulty in international programs, you're right. The National Science Foundation cannot, by law, fund directly to another country. But I do think it would be very worthwhile for the European Union, the NIH, the NSF, the foundations in Japan, at the government level, to create an international pool of funds that then could be used to solve global problems.
And the issue of mental health, are we ignoring it because it's less visible? And
No, but I would say that you should consider that we're learning things about diet that does affect our mental health in a very powerful way. So I'd stay tuned on that one for sure.
Harvey.
I was actually very pleased that the questioner raised the point about mental health. When you look at the estimates about the global burden of disease and the projections for the next 2 decades, the total burden of disease from psychiatric ailments, including psychosis, depression, and especially from the neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, taken together, will be the single largest disease burden in the world estimated by the year 2020. So it's not very far from now. When the World Health Organization defines health, for years it has always emphasized it's more than the absence of disease, but rather a state of physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And it's that positive definition of health that I think we need to keep in mind. But the point about the importance of the burden of neurological and neurodegenerative conditions is really important if we want to take, as others have emphasized, an evidence-based approach to resource deployment to advance health in the world.
Thank you, Harvey. And now we'll have another round of questions. I'd just like to remind people that are watching online that you can email your questions and comments in to info@kavlifoundation.org or tweet with the hashtag KavliSF. But for some members of the audience here, Julie, you wanted to ask a question. Don't be afraid to cross the line, just come along and do that. And if you could line up the gentleman over there.
My question to the panel is that with so many distinguished basic scientists in the room this afternoon, here's your chance to call on them. But if it takes so many years or even decades for the technologies such as to mature, for basic research, for the products of basic research to mature into technologies such as lasers or remote sensing, satellites, and for those to then be applied to global health problems. How would you like to call on basic scientists to get involved sooner, somehow to shortcut that enormous time lag that there is, and harness perhaps their creativity, not yet the technologies that their work might lead to, but their creativity and ideas that they have today to address the problems that need urgently solving?
Thank you, Julie. The gentleman over there.
Yes, my name is Ole Ottersen. I'm from the University of Oslo, president and employee of the University of Oslo. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I think I have a question that I do hope will be considered in the discussion now. First of all, I'm currently heading an international commission with the intriguing title Global Governance for Health, sponsored by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, in fact. It's a collaboration with Lancet. So this summer, I made a travel to Tanzania and to Myanmar, Burma. And this travel gave ample opportunity, so to speak, for reflection on the very issues that we're discussing today. And it relates also to what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton mentioned in her speech when she was here this spring. She said that what we need in global health, and this resonates very well with what Alice Dautry said, is country ownership. You have to build competence within the different countries. In this perspective, of course, it's also interesting that Hillary Clinton mentioned that all the myriads of NGOs, they are sort of getting in the way of each other. And in fact, it's very difficult to develop a country ownership where you have all these different targeted initiatives. So my question to the panel would be, what could the universities do when it comes to the slow food equivalent of building up competence in health services in the land, in the countries that need this the most? Is it the right sort of priority to simply go for the targeted endeavors? Or should we as scientists try to build up the universities and from there the institutions that the different countries need in order to develop a country ownership when it comes to their health service systems? Thank you.
I can see that Alice and Kiyoshi are dying to answer that question, but let me just take a couple more in the bag and we'll deal with them in the round. The gentleman over there, and if you could line up the lady over there, Derek.
Hi, Kevin Marvon, the Executive Officer of the American Astronomical Society. Dr. Kurosawa's comments really resonated with me about the issue of corporate social responsibility, partly because I've just finished reading a book by Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of the company Patagonia in the United States. And he summarizes their 40 years of experience being a socially responsible company. And I wonder if the panel could talk a little bit about how corporations could either be induced or encouraged to do more than they're doing now, because they are some of the most powerful forces that have been unleashed on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And there was a hand over there. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Cecilia Rydén. I'm from Sweden. I'm a consultant of infectious diseases, associate professor. And my question to the panel and also to the moderator here is, how could we make more of an interference between basic science and what is applicable to the generations that are living now, not the future generations that will probably be the one that are benefiting from what is done in natural basic science now, but what can we do to get the information out quicker? And that's where journalists, media, public service is, I think, very important, and to make prophylaxis, because many of the diseases that have been addressed here, like HIV, malaria, are preventable diseases, as is diarrhea, when you have clean water and you can wash your hands also. One important global problem also is tuberculosis that has not been addressed here. Tuberculosis is not so contagious as some of the others, but it's still there, and we have a lot of resistance problems. And many of those diseases are preventable, and it's somehow a matter of information to the public. And in the Northern Hemisphere, now HIV is suppressed, so we think it's a treatable disease, but it's still not treatable. We don't get rid of the virus, whereas in the Southern Hemisphere, we still need to suppress the virus in many people. But everywhere, we need the information about how to prevent to get infected. And the same thing, I think, is very important. And I think there is a very good issue that has also been brought, that we can use, like smartphones, we have much quicker possibilities to spread information, to prevent for the living generations. How would they be able to get a better life now?
Well, if I could take that point first on information, I think in many ways you've alluded to the answer to your own question. As a global broadcaster, as a news broadcaster, in terms of getting stuff on, I can't get it on just because it's worthy and important. I require it to be a news story. And also, I'm not speaking for the BBC, but for any news broadcaster, it's got to be relevant and important to the domestic audience. News audiences get higher audiences than any other broadcasting outlet. So it is very important. You can have documentaries about these issues. But I suppose if there are stories about TB and HIV/AIDS, for the domestic UK audience, it's not felt to be as important as, say, the discovery of the Higgs boson or some space research. And so it is hard to get that onto domestic TV, although World TV, which is also one of our portfolios and platforms rather, and also News Online, they love stories like that. So it's one of the, so I work for a broadcaster, but we're living in an age where there's all sorts of ways to get information across for journalists and for also citizen journalists. So I think, you know, the community of science journalists do have to think about ways of, in some ways, circumventing the big broadcasters in the way that you're talking about circumventing the big funders, and to try and get their messages across too. So that's my answer to your question. Just on the issue of NGOs getting in the way and what universities can do to try and, I can see Kiyoshi laughing here, can do to build up capacity. I was just wondering if you and Alice could take that one.
I think particularly after the last 10 years, I think with more connectivity, I think many leading universities in the US and others are really focusing on undergraduate education. During undergraduate, offering many programs so that they are almost forced to go somewhere like Africa, India, where your partner and your program may be. So that D-Lab, I think, started like 2000. It's become one of the most attractive undergraduate course at the MIT. So what they do is that they study and sort of issue in Tanzania and this and that and the water in this country, and they take some prototype and they study all the things, and they have to go there in the local place during summer vacation, and there's a local mentors because their value may be quite different. So through this, many discovered, oh, that's what I can do a lot, and then go to some business school, and D-Light was exactly when I saw the CEO of D-Light. Have you been to MIT D-Lab? And he said yes. And so he really wanted to do this light with the solar panel, with this LED in the package, so he created a company in China, so just they sell it $1 a piece, and that's great. And just wipe out kerosene, all the things. So, and there's a lot of opportunities. So as a university president, I think you encourage university undergraduate to go somewhere and see that. I think Norway has a great tradition, and I think that is a strength. And I think even in Japan, I have been pressuring and advocating undergraduate students, take a leave and go somewhere. And then just we stay connected. And just one guy made a big news headline in Bangladesh because he just tried to send this poor village student to Dhaka University, who did it, and just with all the DVD and also internet education. Now he went to now Palestine, and he's trying to do the same in Palestine. Still remain undergraduate class. But I think that kind of passionate, so the principle has been changing. One is rather than pushing something, but rather pull is a principle. You know, what kind of pull force they have in different countries, what are the pull and needs and what is the values they sense. And you have to know that. You cannot push the thing. And also university is becoming not an institution of higher education. University has become an institute of learning. So we have to learn from the future leaders too. I think that is a great learning experience for faculty too. So I think dynamics and paradigm, also like strengths all the time, we build a strong system and a strong country, but rather than strengths, it's become more resilient country. I mean, just that kind of perception, changing perception is really dramatic, I think, and also CSR, I think that's another thing. I think always as I push Japanese companies, just this is not CSR, this is a strategic investment for your future. How you do that? So always ask them how much money you spend in public relations. If you think about only a few, that would be a cheap thing for invest. And also like ISEC, student internship, and send some employee and invite some student from your targeting country for like 2, 3, 4 months. ISEC is another sort of undergraduate student internship abroad. I mean, that kind of could be used, and each of students become your ambassador in the future. Yes. No question about that.
And Alice, particularly advice to universities, what they can do?
Yes, I think universities can do a lot, and I agree with Koichi. You know, in Europe, one of the best working programs is Erasmus, you know, where students go from one country to the other. Probably this is, from my point of view, the biggest success story. We could do it at another level. Universities can send their students to other countries, and it will create this kind of momentum between young people that build the future. The other thing that universities could do is couple with a university so that some students from that country come, for instance, to Oslo, but it would have to be not for such a long time, but on a permanent basis. They come and go back and forth. The point is not to induce a brain drain, because, you know, if you get students out of the country and they like Norway or France or the United States or Japan, then you lose the good brains, the ones which are trained. So it's more creating connections, having them go back and forth between two universities. And I think this, you don't need so many people in the countries to build capacities. Just a few can do a lot, because then they have their own students. So universities are really important, I think, and research institutions too.
It's all about the relationships. That doesn't cost anything at all.
No, it costs a trip, and let the universities, you know, have some lodging, but this is not very expensive.
And Rita and Harvey, I mean, it's a related question, but advice to corporations. Can we harness, you know, the desire of many corporations to try and do some good and to do some good, and if so, how do we do it? And also to basic scientists, can they be more creative within their own institution? So from a bottom-up approach, try and, you know, do what they can. Rita.
It's given me an opportunity to ride one of my hobby horses. I would like very much to see major program for countries to establish whereby funding is provided for laboratory-to-laboratory connections over a 3 to 5 year period, where the students are carrying out the research and doing their studies in their own countries, but the funds are there for 3-week trips or a 6-month or a month trip back and forth over a period of 3 to 5 years, working on a collaborative project with internet, with video teleconferencing. It can really separate, I think it can do away with the barriers that often come up with language and culture. It's I think, in a 21st century approach to how research should be funded on an international basis. With respect to corporations, again, I think that if we could just harness interdisciplinary science, linking engineers with biologists, with physicists and mathematicians and computer scientists, industry can be much more productive and effective. Let's say just in, discharges from product manufacture. If they could only understand that they're losing lots and lots of money in product that's discharged in the trace amounts, or maybe not so trace amounts, that get discharged with inefficient production. So if there are interdisciplinary approaches taken to some of these problems, and especially I think, especially I think the whole industry of waste treatment, right now it's really quite bizarre that we discharge into waterways heavy metals and chemicals and other products that could be actually retained and not discharged and resold and reused if we apply some of the modern techniques of fermentation technology. So I think we will have to, by the very nature of declining resources and raw products, to learn how to reuse and recycle much more effectively and much more efficiently and economically.
Harvey.
Well, I just offer 4 quick suggestions on the question of the corporate responsibility, the social responsibility, on the issue of shortcutting the translation of basic science, the role of basic scientists for effect. On the question of corporate social responsibility, first, I think we could do much more to ensure that the training and education of leadership in the corporate sector, in our business schools, in our training programs, have an emphasis on the ethics of business and the social responsibility of corporations today. That's number 1. Number 2, I think we could do more as a community to celebrate those corporate leaders that have taken initiative and have represented themselves and their companies as good social citizens. Third, when there's egregious cases of the absence of social responsibility, it should be exposed. It should be done in a way that embarrasses the leadership and the governors and the stockholders of a company, and induce them to take steps to correct the problems that they are a part of. And finally, and I think most powerfully, if it were actually profitable to be a good corporate citizen because the public insisted on buying the products of good corporate citizens, then corporations would become better corporate citizens. So those are, on the corporate responsibility idea, 4 things. On the question of basic scientists and short-circuiting, I don't think there's a way, nor would I want, to deflect any scientists from their passion and what their heart tells them they want to pursue. At the same time, first, I do think we could do more, and the scientists individually could do more, to immerse themselves so that they understand what are the issues globally and the health concerns of the world where they might find that they would be interested to devote at least a portion of their scientific inquiry in a way that relates more closely to the solution of those problems. Secondly, scientists can be part of mentoring and partnership programs, working through their universities or other ways, through laboratories, in peer-to-peer and teacher-to-student relationships with counterparts in developing countries. Third, scientists can do more as individual and group policy advisors to their governments and other leaders about what is needed, not only for science, but through science to policies that will affect health and solve other myriad of social problems where science and technology have a critical voice to express. And finally, I believe that scientists could be less reticent as public spokespersons for the achievements of science, for the roles of science, for what the public should understand about science. And this means not simply thinking about what they have to communicate, but understanding also the needs and priorities and values of the media so that scientists can work more successfully through our media, both the traditional media and the new social media, to be more effective communicators and champions for science that would help advance public understanding and solutions to these health problems.
Harvey, thank you very much, and I endorse the last point. I've obviously got a vested interest in as many scientists talking to me as possible, but it does a lot of good, and what's important are kind of adult conversations with ideally science and health journalists. We do get it. and we'd like to work with you on some of these issues. And you mentioned social media. This forum has been webcast, and we have had some points and issues raised. Time is a little against us, so I think I'll just have to read them out and then come to you for your closing summaries. So this person said, more than 7 million children under the age of 5 die from malnutrition. How can we eliminate waste in developed agriculture so that we can get food to those that need it most? Another comment, why are healthcare costs so high for even small procedures? How do we change our healthcare mindset to a more preventative framework? And then, what is the best way that the general public can help improve global health? And finally, can each panellist name her one scientific priority when it comes to addressing global health? So, as I say, we're now at the closing stages of this forum, which seems to have flown by. Maybe, Fred, we can have an extra hour next time, I'm sure. But, so I'm terribly sorry, but if I can ask you to sum up, just in 2.5 minutes, your feelings, and possibly if you want to address some of the points that have been sent in through email and Twitter. Harvey first.
Well, first, I have benefited enormously from the comments of my colleagues and from the many questions and comments from those who are in attendance. I would just say that I do think on these last points that the public at large does have a vital role in making the problems of global health real solutions. And in democracies, at least, the governments we have are essentially the governments that we put in place. And if the general public comes to a view and a conviction that there is a shared and collective responsibility to do more in advance of global health, ultimately, the governments will follow the will of the public. It does take leadership and vision on the part of our political leaders, but I think it will be more successful if that is matched or exceeded by a degree of concern, conviction, and demand for action on the part of the public.
Rita?
With respect to the question from the person who came in on the internet, getting food to market and preventing spoilage is probably the one major step that could be taken very quickly that would be very, very significant in providing more food for the children who go hungry. With respect to the meeting, I would like to personally thank Fred Kavli for this wonderful opportunity. And I would say it's very easy for me to say what my passion is, and that's safe water coupled with sanitation. We can do more by providing that commodity, if you will, to the countries of the world that lack it, because we address immediately so many diseases for which we don't have vaccines, and it's very unlikely that we will have vaccines. Just a tidbit, we've already learned that when a victim has cholera and also has the Giardia parasite, the cholera bacterium produces a whole lot more toxin, which makes the victim ill. So understanding and providing safe water, I think, will do more than anything else we could possibly do.
Thank you. Alice?
I think the general public is already doing quite a lot. A lot of the NGOs are supported by the general public. So the general public is actually supporting already a lot of actions in global health. And the general public can do more by showing interest, by discussing it, by participating in events like this one, by asking questions, just putting it in the front scene as the Kavli Foundation has done. It's a topic. So if it's a topic, here is a topic at the G8, at the G20, in political debate, it changes the whole issue, and this comes from the general public, or can come from general public. If I had to say what is my one priority, it would be training in underdeveloped countries. very simply. I think by training, you multiply so much your action because you train 2 people and they train 2 others and becomes exponential, and exponential growth is very quick. So to me, this is would be my priority.
Thank you, Alice. Kiyoshi.
I think changing the establishment is a very hard work to do. I mean, so that I'm rather last maybe 10 years or so focusing on the youth and not necessarily educating something which based on old paradigm, but I think let them see what they really want to know. So that I'm encouraging making a program in like Okinawa, for example, like with the Asian Japanese youth, about 15, 14, 16s, spend 3 months together. And after that course, 3 weeks, they stayed connected in Facebook. And all the time in summer, I mean, they are so excited about their memories. And that kind of thing. And undergraduate, I think I really try to promote and encourage students, not necessarily institutions, but students, take a leave and go somewhere. And just we stay connected, emails and Twitters, and they have a problem, we can communicate. And they are doing a wonderful thing. And they become an ambassador of your country and also the ambassador of UN. I mean, that, I think I really focusing my priority on that kind of encouraging young people to go abroad and making your connecting dots in the future.
So thank you all for being so brief. It means we've got a little extra time, more than I thought, unless you want to hear me sound off. So why not take what I thought was the most interesting question, which Alice has already answered from Twitter, which... what would be, Kiyoshi, your one scientific priority when it comes to addressing global health?
Know the world.
Know the world?
Yeah, not the science, but I think your feeling. Then you find what you like to do. I'm sure of that.
Rita?
Well, I think...
You said water.
Water, of course, is, to me, is the critical stuff of life. I would also just comment that I find the new world of science absolutely fascinating, and it would be fun to be starting all over again because there's so much happening right now.
Thank you. Harvey?
If I had to select a single scientific priority, it's really an impossible question because there are so many ways in which science must be pursued in order to achieve its goals. As a process, however, for science, I would like to see the resource commitment for a sufficient emphasis on essential research led by those in the countries where the problems exist and need to be solved, so that the partnerships were not from north to south, but actually induced to the south from the north. And I think that giving the resources and the authority, the training, the means to those in the local setting would mean science that was truly directed at the essential problems for health today.
Well, Harvey, that is a big challenge. Thank you, all of you. If I can just somehow try and summarize what's been an excellent meeting. I mean, I thought we got off to a great start with the Prime Minister of Norway, who came along and it wasn't a political speech, he just kind of totally got it. He really got it, expressed it, and took due credit for the part that Norway has played in these international initiatives. But I think it moved smoothly on to, well, how can we do better? And I'm so pleased that the Kavli Science Forum was the forum for this discussion, because debates on public health can often become very ill-focused, more to do with politics. A lot of anger is expressed. And I know that even with the generous amount of time that we've been given, we can't solve the world's problems. But I think through your talks, Harvey, you sort of set out the issues of what's needed. Rita, you talked about some of the good things that can happen that basic science can offer. Alice, you were talking about, you were being an optimist, but you were just talking about what we need to do to try and make to translate basic science into science and solutions that are appropriate. And Unfortunately, we weren't able to have a fifth panelist along, Haley Debas, who was unable to make it. And his thing is about kind of listening to the South, having technologically appropriate solutions. And I think that that's something easier said than done. How do we do it? You know, how are institutions and organizations structured to be able to try and give away some of that stuff? And maybe it's as simple as building these relationships, which cost very little. And Kiyoshi, I mean, it's just fantastic that you're talking about new ways and new systems. You know, the systems that we have worked incredibly well, and it shouldn't be interpreted as the fact that we don't think that the current ways of dealing with these huge issues aren't effective. They've saved millions of lives, but what more can we do? And you're addressing it through finance is absolutely key, and addressing it through information and a realization that while these countries might be poor, they've got mobile phone networks, and there are a lot of people with mobile phones. So in some ways, forget the journalists, if I may say so, and you can get the information out there directly. So in summing up, I think science has got enormous potential to improve global health, but those on the front line are often unable to exploit it because they simply don't know what's on offer. And I believe that science can make a far greater contribution through global health. And what's important is to have an open and honest debate about the things that need to be done to make the system of global public health even better than it is now. And let's not forget what this is all about. People are dying prematurely of diseases that can be prevented and treated, particularly children. And so that's what this is about. And so it leads me to thank the panelists, the organisers at the Kavli Foundation and the Norwegian Academy, particularly Professor Kohn and Professor Strenseth, who've led from the front. And also, finally, if I can also thank Fred Kavli, who has, you know, got a vision beyond your own business. You've kind of set the standard, and you've done your own thing, and you've decided what you feel to be important in the world of science. And I'm so glad that you've decided that the topic for this forum should be about how science can best serve those that need it the most and to help save lives. So thanks to all of you, and thanks for attending.